Welcome to the Word Room. Let's jump into Genesis chapter 29 as we go chapter by chapter through the whole Bible. In this chapter, the trickster Jacob ends up getting tricked by Laban. Let's go. So let's jump right into our summary of Genesis chapter 29. In this chapter, Jacob travels and finds the house of Laban, and he meets and falls in love with Rachel, one of Laban's daughters. He worked for Laban for 7 years in order to marry Rachel, but at the wedding, Laban gave him Leah in a trick. He swapped out the daughters and tricked Jacob into marrying Leah instead of Rachel. Laban then makes him work for 7 more years for Rachel. And at the end of the chapter, we see that Leah, who wasn't the bride that Jacob wanted, ended up having 4 sons for him. So let's look at some takeaways from this chapter. Now, if you remember, Jacob had actually fled from his home because Esau wanted to kill him after he tricked his father into giving him the blessing. And then his mother suggested he flee, as well as Isaac sending him there to find a bride. And so he sends him to Laban's house. So Jacob has traveled looking for Laban, and he comes upon a well. And there was on the mouth of the well, there was a stone. This is at Haran. This is where Laban's family was. And there were shepherds there, and they would wait until all the shepherds gathered to move the stone for water. It was a heavy stone, so they would wait until all the shepherds got there so they could move the stone together to make it easy to move. Jacob was told that Laban's daughter Rachel was coming to get water. Now, Rachel was actually a shepherdess as she was watching the sheep of her father. Jacob knew he was supposed to marry one of the daughters of Laban, as his father told him, so he attempted to send the shepherds away so he could spend time with Rachel as she was coming. But they said they couldn't leave because they had to wait to water the sheep until all the shepherds got there with their flocks so they could move the rock out of the way. Rachel came with her father's sheep, and again, she was a shepherdess, and Jacob actually rolls the stone away by himself for her. This is 2 things. He's trying to be kind to her, but also this is him almost trying to impress her. It takes a whole bunch of shepherds to move this stone, but it says that Jacob did it by himself. He was trying to show off his strength and impress her. He then greets her with a kiss and cries for joy. And it says he weeps. He actually sheds tears for joy. And there's a couple of reasons for this, but primarily the fact that he actually found Laban and his family because he had been traveling and, he didn't, it's not like the ancient days they had GPS they could pull up on their phone, right? But he just happened to run into a well at the exact time that the shepherds knew about Laban, found the right place, and the exact time that Rachel, Laban's daughter, happened to be coming to the well at that exact moment. And in all of that, he cries for joy. And she goes and tells her father after Jacob tells him who she is. So Laban comes out and meets Jacob, and then Jacob ends up staying with Laban for about a month, and then Laban says that he should not work for him for free and asks what wages he wants. So for a while, for a few days, it's like a visitor, but after a while, if you're staying with me over a month, you need to work. You need to put forth work, but I'll pay you. What are the wages that you should get? Basically serve me and I'll pay you. But the wages that he wanted was actually Rachel. He wanted to marry his daughter. So Jacob offers to work for Laban for 7 years in order to marry Rachel, and Laban agrees to that. So after 7 years, it's time for the wedding, but Laban decides to trick Jacob, and at the wedding, he gives Leah to him instead of Rachel. And Jacob didn't realize this until after the marriage was consummated. Now, you may be asking, how is that possible that he wouldn't realize it was a different girl? There's many different explanations for this, but Josephus, who was a 1st century historian, Jewish historian, he states that it was because Jacob had gotten drunk at the wedding. So when they tricked Jacob, when Rachel and Leah were switched out that night to consummate the wedding, he was so drunk he didn't pay attention. That's what Josephus says. So he ends up getting drunk. He ends up being tricked by Laban, and when he wakes up the next morning, he's with Leah and not Rachel, who he had worked for. So Jacob ended up having to work 7 more years for Rachel, which is crazy that he had ended up working 14 years after agreeing to only work 7. Now, Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, but God saw Leah's pain and opened her womb and gave her children. She actually has 4 sons in this chapter. The first one is named Reuben, which means that name means behold a son, because she's like, behold, look, I bore you a son, trying to gain her husband's affection. The second son she has is Simeon. That means hearing. And it's means that, she talks about how God has heard her cry because her husband doesn't love her. Then she gets to the third child, and she names him Levi, which means attachment. And it means that hopefully her husband will now attach himself to her, that he will care for her, that he will love her. Then she gets finally to her 4th son that she has in this chapter, and she names him Judah. And Judah means praise. And this is the first son she has that she doesn't attach to her pain of her husband not loving her as much as Rachel. She names him Praise because she is finally praising the Lord even in her suffering, which is very, very important. So this tells us 5 things about God. Number 1, he orders our steps. Jacob was not seeking the Lord. He was traveling. He happens to show up at that well at that exact time in the correct place with shepherds who knew who Laban was when he was looking for Laban, at the exact time that Rachel would be coming to the well to feed her sheep. God ordered his steps even if he wasn't seeking the Lord. God brought him right where God needed him to be. 2, he uses our circumstances to bring conviction. Jacob was the trickster. You can see the parallels between Laban tricking Jacob and Jacob tricking his father Isaac, right? Jacob tricked Isaac into thinking that he was someone else, that he was Esau. Laban tricks Jacob into thinking his bride is someone else, Rachel. So he tricks, and it's almost like coming full circle that what Jacob did, Laban was now doing to Jacob in a different way, but the same concept. And God is using that to bring about conviction in Jacob. We see that Jacob changes through the course of, from that dream of Jacob's ladder all the way through, that Jacob ends up changing and being a completely different person. God is using this circumstance to show Jacob, even though it's not God doing this, God is using it to show Jacob the pain he caused when he tricked his brother, tricked his father, when he was living a life of lying and deceit. God also uses the unwanted for his purpose. God had promised Jacob that he would bring about many descendants. His whole plan was to bring about the nation of Israel through him. And God uses the unwanted bride. He uses Leah, the one who wasn't wanted by Jacob, to bring about the first 4 sons that would become the foundation of the tribes of Israel. God will use the things that we don't want for his purpose. Many times it is the things we don't want that God purposely puts in our life for the purpose of bringing about something that he desires for us. Don't overlook the unwanted things. God uses the unwanted things many times. Number 4, he shapes us through experience. Through this whole process, from the dream that he has to having to flee for his life, the dream he has to showing up here and God, ordering his steps, to him being tricked and having to work all these years and all this chaos that happens around him. He's using that to shape Jacob into the man that would become the father of Israel, the man who he would end up changing his name to Israel. And the shaping's not done yet. We'll see in the next few chapters. But God is shaping Jacob to become the man that he wants. And he's using the experiences that Jacob is going through to do it. And finally, God is faithful to his promise. We see the 4 sons born at the end of this chapter. Even through all the trickery and all the deceit and all of the crazy way it came about, God brought about descendants through the process, even though it was through sin and deceit and trickery and all this other stuff. Ultimately, God is faithful to his promise and brings about a generation that would come after Jacob who would found the nation of Israel. Very, very important. 5 things we learned about God. I hope you dig deeper into this chapter. Comment down below what you got out of this chapter. Until next time.